Hello, I'd like to read my favourite chapter from Beetle Creek. It's chapter 43, The Tennis Tournament. Beetle Creek is set in the 40s and 50s in rural Australia, the bush, as we say. Sometimes coincidences can have the most damnable effect. It was a coincidence that Dad found his old tennis racket lodged behind the wardrobe the very week that the Beetle Creek annual Anglican tennis tournament was announced. It had been lost for maybe 20 years. "I used to be pretty good once," Dad said, doing sweeping forehands in the kitchen and endangering Mum's good china. "I've a mind to put me name down for the comp this year." "Well, stick to the men's double, Fred. You're not as young as you used to be," Mum told him plainly. For a wonder, Dad did as she suggested. He drew Constable Williams as his doubles partner. "I just hope he can play," Dad said. "He's a bit on the chubby side." This from a man who couldn't see his own feet. Dad's racket was a veteran. It had probably belonged to his father before him. It was a strange square shape. The frame was yellowed and had a broad warp to it. There were two strings missing entirely, but happily not in adjacent positions. When patted, the strings made a plonk sound instead of a pling. There wasn't exactly a flood of entrants in the tennis tournament. Dad and Constable Williams made it through to the quarterfinals without much trouble. Their first match was a forfeit because the opposing team, the Lester brothers, broke down on the way into town. Their second match was against an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old who barely understood the rules, let alone how to get a ball over the net. Their third match was against Bruiser Walton and someone I can't remember. Bruiser hit one more ball out over the netting and onto the road than Dad did, and so lost the game. Dad was, unjustifiably, proud of making the quarterfinals. "We're getting better every week," he told Mum, contrary to all the evidence. "I feel I've finally got me eye in." The team they drew to play against in the quarterfinals was unfortunate, to say the least. It was Pat O'Brien and Gordon Woods, both seasoned players as well as mortal enemies of Fred Burnley. While no one could accuse the organiser of the competition, the Reverend Briskley, of being anything but impeccably honest, his choice of Mrs. O'Brien as the umpire on this particular court was naive, if not downright suicidal. The assemblage on the court told it all. Mrs. O'Brien sat stiffly on her high perch in an immaculately pleated white tennis frock and matching sunshade. Pat O'Brien was wearing long cream flannels because he had skinny white legs and didn't like displaying them. Gordon Woods wore crisp white tennis shorts, and both men appeared to have bought new Dunlop tennis shoes for the occasion. They looked like Davis Cup candidates. Their opponents were not quite as impressive. Constable Williams was playing in his uniform, and his boots were something of a handicap. Dad was wearing khaki work shorts and did at least have sand shoes on, even if he had slit the ends so that his big toes would have more room. What the Burnley-Williams partnership lacked in accoutrement, they made up for in confidence. Dad and Constable Williams won the toss, and Dad served. He served double faults 3 times consecutively, bringing the score to 40-love. Dad was clearly nervous, but his next serve, replete with much swishing and grunting, made it to the net and died, landing just over the net in the service court. Pat O'Brien came hurtling from the baseline, but it was clear he had no chance of getting near it. Dad's shot was a winner. "Foot fault," called Mrs. O'Brien. "That call's a bit flamin' late, ain't it?" Dad roared. "Sorry, but your toe was definitely over the baseline." Dad got his second serve and slammed it neatly into the net. "Game," called Mrs. O'Brien. The second game proceeded by aces, Mr. O'Brien serving one to Dad, one to Constable Williams by turn, until Mrs. O'Brien called fondly, "Game to Pat." Constable Williams fared better at service. He aced Gordon, but didn't get one past Mr. O'Brien. Dad was on the net and managed to lob a return and confound Pat nicely. Eventually, with a little less enthusiasm, Mrs. O'Brien called, "Game to Constable Williams." It was clear that the O'Brien Woods team had no animosity towards Constable Williams, but they had taken to heckling Dad on his service. After 3 more double faults, Mr. O'Brien yelled, "This is ridiculous. Where's the competition? You couldn't hit the side of a barn with a cowpat, Burnley." Dad glowered, but the angrier he got, the worse his aim became. Gordon chortled, "I might as well sit down in the middle of the court and have a spell when he's serving." To make matters worse, the competitors for the next match had arrived and were standing by watching. Each time Dad served, his arm muscles bulged as if he were chopping wood, and the racket whistled through the air. But the strings acted like a trampoline when he connected with the ball. It seemed as though you might almost catch up to the ball if you ran behind it. Somehow or other, largely due to Constable Williams, they tumbled along into the second set. The first set went to O'Brien Woods, 6-2. The second set, which would give the match to O'Brien Woods if they won it, stood at 5-3. It was a crucial game, and unfortunately Dad was due to serve. Suddenly, as Dad was mopping his face, Pete Prentice stepped forward. "Here, for God's sake, Fred, try my racket." It was a signed Pancho Gonzalez special with nylon rather than gut strings. "Do you think so?" said Dad. "Well, it can hardly do any harm, can it?" Pete said. Dad took the racket and fidgeted at the service line. "Play up, please," Mrs. O'Brien called. "Hold your flaming horses," Dad bellowed. He was trying to adjust to the weight of the new racket. Finally, he flung the ball in the air and put his considerable bulk behind the swing. The racket connected with a satisfying thwack, and the ball scorched low over the net, nipped the edge of the service court, and flew away between Mr. O'Brien's legs. It was a magnificent ace. "Out," called Mrs. O'Brien. There was a grumble from the spectators, and Dad called out, "Out me foot!" "Out," Mrs. O'Brien stated firmly. "Play on." "Can't you do something?" Dad muttered hotly to Constable Williams. "You're the flaming copper." "I'm not on duty, mate." And even though blind Freddie could see it was in by a mile, bad umpiring ain't a criminal offence. Dad went grimly back to the service line, shaking his head. He looked at the racket and ball as if they were somehow magic, served again as hard as the first time, and caught O'Brien with an unmistakable ace. "Fifth, love?" Mrs. O'Brien said thinly. "Tell that to the bloody Pope!" Dad yowled gleefully. He turned and fired a ball at Gordon, who managed to return it, but Constable Williams was in place to lob it back neatly. 30, love, Mrs. O'Brien called. There was a smattering of applause.
Tell that to the bloody Pope,
Dad yelled again and got a good laugh. Mrs. O'Brien signalled for the competition organiser. Reverend Briskley stepped up to the umpire stand. Mrs. O'Brien leant down and had a heated discussion with him about Dad's behaviour. The Reverend Briskley may well have agreed with Dad's sentiment, but felt compelled to call Dad over and caution him not to use profanity on the court. Dad returned and served a little less sting to Mr. O'Brien, who returned the ball to Constable Williams, who skidded it nicely off the baseline. The perfect shot! Mr. O'Brien turned in dismay. Out! Called Mrs. O'Brien. Constable Williams looked thunderstruck. 30-15. Dad was livid. He turned to Gordon and weighed the ball in his hand as if he was thinking of throwing it instead of serving. Gritting his teeth, he launched the ball and swiped. Poor Mr. Prentice, the fine racket he had so kindly lent Dad, struck the ground and snapped at the handle. The ball arced off. Humming like an angry hornet, it slammed Mrs. O'Brien full in the chest. Constable Williams winced. The poor woman screamed in pain, clutching her left breast with both hands, and stood up precariously on the steps of the umpire stand. Gordon Woods ran towards her and caught her as she fell. Well, to be more precise, Gordon Woods was under her when she hit the ground, with his knees up around her waist and his arms clasping her breasts. Under other circumstances, he might have enjoyed the experience, but she was a biggish lady and she had completely winded him. Williams, Mr. O'Brien called, you saw what Burnley did. That constitutes an assault, not to mention bad sportsmanship. I'm sorry, Pat, Constable Williams drawled. I was looking away. I missed it.
Bad sportsmanship, my ass,
Dad yelled. He ran to the net.
I'm really sorry, Mrs. O'Brien.
Unfortunately, Dad got too close to the net, and Mr. O'Brien hit him on the ear. Gordon Woods was on his feet now and scrambling over to the net to take a poke at Dad too. Dad hit him in the chest and sent him sprawling back to his side of the net, and this gave Mr. O'Brien the opportunity to get Dad one in the eye. The Reverend briskly stepped between them and pushed Dad back, a plucky and possibly dangerous tactic. Dad controlled himself enough to listen somewhat resentfully to the bawling out that the Reverend was dishing up to them. I have never seen such an outrageous display at an Anglican tennis competition in all my life. I have no alternative but to halt this game, disqualify both teams, and allow the competition to proceed without you. Now please do me the courtesy of leaving the court and going home immediately without any further recurrence of this disgusting behaviour. Suitably chastened, all parties left to lick their wounds in their respective homes.
Do you know, said Dad, with Pete's racket.
Oh, yeah, Pete's racket.
With Pete's racket right from the start, I reckon we could have done 'em.
It's a shame, Fred, a bleeding shame, Mum said, tending to his blackened eye. You might have won the trophy.
Ah, well, Dad said philosophically. It's not like it's Wimbledon or anything. It was just a friendly game.
Thanks for listening.